A cool breeze off from the ocean drifted through my open window. It's 11 p.m., December in Shenzhen, 2022. The weather wasn't cool enough that you need a jacket, but cool enough that you might hear the sniffling and coughing of a standard flu season. I pick up the antigen test in front of me. As I suspected, positive. But I also don't have any of those heinous side effects being trumpeted by the media. Besides a small fever and a small headache, there was nothing. No fear, no anxiety, no coughing. If anything, the sense of novelty of finally getting testing positive after years of lockdown and restrictions was mystifying and relieving. I was finally infected and nothing happened. The timing of it could be better though. It was during my winter holiday break. Instead of going out with friends and family, I spent the whole week indoors, looking through social media for important posts of the day. I saw countless video producers, bloggers, showing and joking their experiences of getting COVID. It was indeed very funny, and I laughed along with them. I was then reminded of a similar evening I spent 3 years ago. There was still this breeze drifting through my window, but it's not coming off the ocean. It's coming from the Yangtze River, because I'm no longer in Shenzhen, I'm in Wuhan. It's 2020. You see, my mother and I had planned to return to Wuhan in 2020 to visit my grandparents for Spring Festival. Even then, there were rumors circulating on the Chinese internet about a mysterious virus. Yet our uncle who lived in Wuhan assured us that there was nothing to worry about. He explained just a few days ago, the government held a very large-scale event called 10,000 People Banquet, with over thousands of families participating. Surely if it was really something as a virus, the government would not be able to hold such a large-scale event. Comforted, we packed our bags and flew to Wuhan. We landed at Wuhan Tianhe International Airport late at night. We saw countless people, especially foreign flight crews wearing masks. But as we worked our way into the city, we left this masks and anxiety behind. Mother even joked, while people all over the world are worrying about this virus, we are still considering what is the best barbecue place for dinner. Yet the next day, dust seemed to be suspended midair above the adults in the living room, all staring dully at the television. The new virus was sweeping Wuhan. Overnight, hundreds of people were infected, and the situation was about to get worse much quicker. Our cheerful visit soon became a fearful one. On the third day of our return, media confirmed that the virus is indeed highly infectious and dangerous. As tensions in the city grew, me and my mother had decided to evacuate me and my grandparents back to Shenzhen, where the situation was safer. As the wheels left the tarmac, we reached cruising altitude, securing our freedom. Back in the city, doors were closed, windows were shuttered, barricades erected, lockdown. When we arrived in Shenzhen, the next 14 days felt longer than the previous 14 years in my life. My family seemed to be frozen in place by fear. We checked our temperatures hourly, recorded COVID tests daily, panicking about the possibility of being infected. And as if our own fear wasn't enough, we were also met by the same discrimination that came from our own community. When we arrived in Shenzhen, our community WeChat group, consisting of over 400 people, quickly began discussing about our potential infection. Over the course of a few hours, thousands of messages were sent discussing how to contain us if it turned out to be positive. Some wanted us to be thrown on the streets, others in quarantine, some even threatened us if we did not leave. We ceased to be part of a community, and us ourselves turned out to be an infection for them to fight. I had expected a warm welcome, maybe some comforting words at least, or even support that were provided by the community. But what we got was a months-long isolation, quarantine. I then started to see hate and criticism, directing towards Wuhan and its people, permeating on the Western and Chinese media. I had begun to lose faith in humanity. I began to believe that in the face of disasters and death, there would be no such thing as mutual collaboration, only selfishness that derives purely from the desire to survive. Yet meanwhile, back in Wuhan, my fellow Wuhanese reaffirmed my faith in humanity and proved that a community remains strongest when together. Despite state media, international media, and everyday people vilifying and scapegoating community, they remained strong and disciplined, and each contributed to the fighting of COVID through their own ways. Last summer, I had the opportunity to return to Wuhan for the first time in 3 years. Many elements of our trip were the same. We took the same flight, went to the same terminal, even used the same gate. My uncle picked us up as usual, but the difference is that this time, the first thing that we were offered when we got home was disinfectant wipes. My younger little cousin, who used to crawl all over the floor when he was young, now cleaned his hands carefully, washing every bit of his fingernail before eating. My uncle would often take up to the opposite side of the road for COVID test. He explained that people of Wuhan has been stabbed in the throat for the past 3 years. And as we sat down and discussed about the pandemic and what it was like to live in Wuhan, his answers were calm but subdued. His tone implied appall over Wuhan and its citizens, as if Wuhan and its people are unable to walk away from that 2 months of horror and dread, traceless and clean, at least for a very long period of time. but he also told me stories of everyday hero. We often hear stories of renowned scientists, famous doctors, and medical workers, each contributing to the defeating of COVID. These stories are true, but what I want to talk about today are those less spectacular, less noticeable people who previously had no connection to any medical assistance or any other ways they can be involved in this crisis. Yet it is these people who worked together as a collective community and overcame this pandemic. Ms. Yuan, a community secretary, was one of the people who assisted those in need. Her daily task during the pandemic was pretty simple. She had to contact each individual resident, ask for their current situation, any support that she could provide. She was also responsible for distributing food and medicines and occasionally arrange infected patients to be sent to the hospital. This seemingly easy and straightforward task began to take a toll as the daily needs of thousands of people began weighing on her shoulder, especially when people's lives are at stake. Luckily, just when she was about to collapse, her community stood up. In a matter of days, hundreds of people came to her office. The young, the old, college students, workers, people with different backgrounds, occupations, all came to join the army of fighting COVID. As fear fogged the entire city, no one hesitated and knew exactly what their roles were as a member of the community and as a citizen of Wuhan. In an interview, she said she had the opportunity to leave Wuhan and could have avoided the lockdown, but she chose not to. She said, "I'm responsible for serving every single person here. I'm not leaving when everyone needs me the most." And when I asked her whether she was surprised at all that so many came to join her, she said no. She said, "I knew what people of this community and what people of Wuhan are like. I have total faith that COVID was going to be defeated, even at the right beginning." Mr. Yang, a private sport facility business owner, joined to become a community service worker during the beginning of the pandemic. He was mainly responsible for distributing food. He remembers very clearly that there was a little young boy whose mother and father both caught COVID and were sent to the hospital. Every day he would bring supplies to the boy's house and talk to him and comfort him, even though he can only communicate with the boy through this large iron door, but his words gave the boy hope and helped him to survive the darkest month of his life. "Wuhan, this is my hometown," he said. "There was no ways I was going to leave. I always believed that as long as we stick together, no crisis can defeat us." It was ordinary citizens like Mr. Yang who mattered the most. When volunteers, community service workers, and medical workers were lacking, ordinary citizens recognized their role as a member of the society, took the burden, and went on the front line. Besides being a volunteer, Mr. Yang also had the added burden of a businessman. During the pandemic, his company could not make any profit, and he still had to pay 70% of the salaries to his workers. But he still considered this a very small thing. Most importantly to him was to maintain the overall sense of positivity and the mental health among his employees. With 30 people dependent on him, he often researched ideas and strategies on how to maintain positivity and send them to social media group chat. On a daily basis, they have online meetings discussing how some new insights or new knowledge that they learn. It was all about doing things together, he said. Everyone was panicking, so I hope by doing this, I could give a sense of security and positivity to my employees and tell them they are not alone in this crisis. It was all these little things that mattered the most, from small online meetings to little conversations between residents and volunteers. These small yet warm occasions reminded every single Wuhan citizen that they are not alone during this pandemic. Besides manpower, medical shortages were also a huge threat. As fear fogged the entire city, major pharmacies across Wuhan immediately ran out of critical medicine supplies. Yet my uncle, who owns a few small restaurants and a pharmacy, had some of the resources left in stock before the pandemic. Instead of hovering all to himself and his family, which he totally could, he donated the medicines, the goggles, disinfectant wipes, and he then proceeded on to empty his stock of medicines. He told his clerk that all the medicine must be donated for those who in need for free. "These are life-saving medicines," he said. "How can I earn this type of money?" He described his patrons as nervous but calm, standing in line quietly, waiting to get the needed medicine and walking away without saying anything to anyone. On his once busy street with noisy car horns and community chatter, people go sit from buildings to buildings, and the city sounded like a patient holding its breath. Out of all the medical workers, the most busy of them all were medical workers working in pharmacies. Ms. Yang was one of them. During the lockdown, government opened up all the pharmacies in Wuhan for citizens to gain access to basic medical supplies. Ms. Yang's tasks were very complicated. She had to sell medicines, distribute supplies, answer questions from residents, and act as a temporary doctor when citizens got sick of non-COVID disease. This seemingly easy and straightforward task began to take a toll. As thousands of people would be waiting in line to get a medicine, she first had to group all the masks according to the policy. She also had to answer phone calls from residents and ask for basic medical questions. "I basically received phone calls from the beginning of the day to the end," she said. "And at the end of the day, my phone would still ring and it would turn burning hot." For her most memorable moment, she said it was when residents provided her ribs and meats that were given by the government. I knew the community very well, she said. Many residents knew I basically eat chili sauce with rice for weeks, so when they have time, they basically provide me food that were given by the government. I was deeply touched knowing that food was in shortage. In fact, she had never expected this. She said the nine-headed bird, the stereotypical way of describing people of Wuhan as loud, termagant, and irritable was to some extent true. We are known for being quite testy. So when the whole city came together and became so united, it was a total shock for me. These 4 people today are only few examples of a million Wuhanese who contributed to the defeating of COVID. From frontline responders to medical workers, to soldiers to volunteers, and most importantly, common citizens. Wuhan has been scrutinized and demonized by the international community. It has been the center of investigations, indignities, and speculations. Over the past 3 years, the Asian hate in the Western society has been increasing as a result of the pandemic. The world seemed content to undermine the difficulties for the people of Wuhan, prepared to attack rather than to listen or console. The world seemed to forget that it was the people of Wuhan who used their own bodies and blocked the first wave of COVID. What I wanted to do today in this speech is to paint a portrait of a city of real people who suffered and persevered just like any other communities, but did so with the weight of mankind's loathing. COVID has ended. On December 26, 2022, the government issued a notice that COVID-19 has been decreased from Class A infectious disease to Class B. COVID testings were canceled and Chinese tourism were resumed in an orderly manner. This means that COVID-19, which has been affected the whole nation for the past 3 years, will finally withdraw from the stage of history, and an era is really coming to an end. COVID is no longer a threatening disease, and many people, including me, are tired of this topic which has been hovering around our head for the past 3 years. And yet, looking back at it one last time today, how many nouns have we created? From the red code, the blue code, the gray code to the green code to the yellow code. From city management, static management to silent management. Over the past 3 years, we have experienced countless joys and sorrows, ups and downs, witnessed many touching scenes and heroic praises, saw too many strange and hideous farces, and experienced the complexity of human nature. At the end of the day, these 3 years of COVID will just be summarized in a few lines in our history book, but the history of Wuhan will persevere. Thank you.